Mr. Guerra states, Mike, send me the evidence, and if I believe new fraud was just committed during my pension fraud case, he would reopen my investigation. I sent him the true copy of the EMG and the false copy, the Madga Deconinck, just altered during my fraud case, my fraud hearing before Judge Clementi. I faxed Mr. Guerra an 8-page letter written by me dated 3/14/2002, explaining the fraud. Now Mr. Guerra reopens another investigation because he concluded that new fraud had just occurred during my pension fraud case. He concluded that the documents were altered. For 5 months, Mr. Guerra investigates. We were called down for a meeting to meet with Mr. Guerra. Gary Berenholtz, my wife and I, we're now meeting for a 4th or 5th time with Mr. Guerra. Also, my past attorney, Rosemary Carroll, was informed about this latest fraud. She was fuming over it. She jumped in the cab and also came down to meet with all of us. Rosemary Carroll had also looked at the EMGs and knew that they were changed. As I'm waiting for the attorneys to come in, I'm standing in front of the Brooklyn DA's office inside the building. Who walks in? Mr. Charles Hines. I walk over to him and introduce myself as a retired fireman and tell him my name. Charles Hines says, I used to be the fire commissioner. That was my favorite job. He says, Mike, is there anything I could help you with? I said, you're investigating my pension fraud case for 21 months now. 2 separate investigations. Mr. Hines says, really? It's the first time I've heard about it. Who's handling it? I says, Charles Guerra, your assistant director of the Rackets Bureau. Mr. Hines says, I'll give him a call and I'll find out what's going on. This was strange because my attorney, Judge Aiello, had said he had many conversations with Mr. Hines about my investigation. Right after this, Mr. Boyle, our Fire Department Union President, walks into the DA's office. I said, Jimmy, how you doing? Jimmy says, hi Mike, how are you? I said, Jimmy, you remember me? He says, Mike, how could I forget the most famous pension case where Marlene Gold and Mary L. Sullivan screwed you? I sat there on the boards, don't you remember? I said, yeah, Jimmy, I remember. Next, Mr. Boyle says, Mike, what are you doing here? I said, the DA's investigating my pension fraud for 21 months now. Mr. Boyle says, no kidding, who's handling it? I says, Charles Guerra of the Rackets Bureau. One of his assistants was standing there and told him to write that down. I said, Jim, you work here? He says, yeah. He says, I work here. He says, I'll give Guerra a call to find out what's going on. Now we go up to the office and meet with Mr. Guerra, my 2 attorneys, my wife and I. During the meeting with Mr. Guerra stated that he wasn't sure when the EMG report was altered. Rosemary Carroll started yelling and screaming at Mr. Guerra, stating that these records were just altered, Mr. Guerra, in Michael's fraud case, and they were destroyed before the original court records. The only time Madga Deconinck could have changed it and altered the report is now, in his recent fraud case at Judge Clementi's hearing. Clemente never answered to it. The two attorneys were arguing with Mr. Guerra, stating that this was new fraud. It was only now that we submitted the evidence that they had recently pulled out from the court records, this EMG report. And it's only now that she changed the date. Madga Deconinck changed the date. It winds up that Mr. Guerra wouldn't do anything. Now I called the New York FBI office at the end of 2003. The FBI opens an official investigation at the same time for the remaining approximately 1.5 years. So, to take a second out, we now have Judge Clemente committing fraud to cover up for the pension fraud that Marlene Gold, Mary L. Sullivan, and Madga Deconinck were involved in my disability pension. Who would believe this? Who can believe that something like this could ever happen? The records prove this. In 2004, right before the New York Post article came out showing the FBI investigation, I had called the past fire commissioner's Tom Von Essen, where he's working out of Mayor Giuliani's office, Giuliani and Partners. I spoke with Tom for about a half hour on the phone. Tom says, "Mike, I didn't know all this about your pension." He says, "Michael, you should have got your pension." He says, "Mike," he says, "I'll call up Madga Deconinck, the corporation counsel woman, and see if I can help you, see if she'll reopen your case." I don't remember if Tom called me back or if I called him back, but we spoke again a short time later, and Tom told me, "Mike, I'm sorry. Madga won't help. She won't reopen your case." 8 years ago, I went to Dr. Flum's office. I went to his office in Manhattan, where I tape recorded. My wife put she had a camcorder in her pocketbook, and we tape recorded Dr. Flum. I was talking to him about the pension fraud involving my disability case. Dr. Flum was amazed at what happened. Dr. Flum stated, "Michael, what is a pain syndrome?" I said to Dr. Flum, "I have no idea." I says, "But your name is on it, and this is coming from your 1B medical certificate." I said, "Dr. Flum, not only that," I says, "look at your signatures. They're all different. I hired a handwriting document examiner." I said, "You never even signed these reports." He was flabbergasted. He says, "Michael, can I please copy these documents and all these records that you're showing me?" I showed him mounds of medical documents and the signed receipts that the reports were supposed, all my medical evidence and documents were supposed to be read by him, and the signed receipts that they were given to the pension board and never read. He said, "Michael, I'm sorry." He said, "You should have got your pension." I showed him the October 3rd, October 7th, 1991 memo from Rosemary Carroll, and the signed receipt January 7th, 1992 from Mary L. Sullivan, where we submitted just 10 medical documents at that time for the 1B board to review, and the signed receipt that the 1B board from Mary L. Sullivan stated they were again given to the doctors that were never read. Dr. Flum looked at them and couldn't believe it. He looked at the MRI of my lumbar spine and couldn't believe it wasn't red. He looked at the EMG reports that weren't red, that were pulled. These are objective findings.